Imagine putting up something lovely for your neighborhood and then having it torn down without any notice. Of course, Cole Walker, that's what happened to me too. It was an easy dock rebuild that turned into a full-on war with my HOA. I had no idea. My grandfather's old dock was the start of it all. It was breaking down and needed to be replaced. So I chose to rebuild it into something special, a beautiful dock with benches to watch the sunset, LED lights, and walkways that won't slip. My goal was to make something that would bring people in the neighborhood together. However, after only 2 weeks, my neighbors began to gather at my dock instead of the HOA's picnic spot. That's when the head of the HOA, Patricia Northwood, decided to do something. Could you picture someone ruining something you worked so hard on? Sure enough, that's what happened next. Follow me to see how this turned into a real fight. I got up early one Saturday morning, looking forward to my coffee and admiring my dock. I was scared when I opened the door though. Everything I had worked for, my masterpiece, had been turned into floating trash. The lights, the seats, and the beautiful wooden boards were all broken. It looked like a heavy storm had hit. Patricia Northwood was standing there with a piece of paper in her hand that she called emergency order. Workers were still tearing down what was left of my dock with loud chainsaws. I couldn't believe it as I saw 3 months of hard work go to waste. What would you do if you saw all the hard work you had put in going away? Watch to find out how I fought back. It made no sense to me. I went up to Patricia and asked her if she had a permit to tear down this building. I saw her laugh as she waved her paper in my direction. She said, "I don't need a permit when something is dangerous," as if the law were on her side. I did not miss the irony. This was the same woman who put a hot tub on her deck without permission. I was now being told I had broken the rules. I took out my phone and showed her all the permits and papers I had to show that my dock was valid. Patricia wouldn't listen though. She told me that my dock was causing noise disturbances and unauthorized gatherings. It turns out that people liked hanging out at my dock more than her badly planned HOA events. Would you let someone mess up something that brought people together? Watch to find out how I turned things around. I changed my mind about the dock issue after seeing it being torn down. This was now a fight for my property rights, and I wasn't going to back down. I called Tom Bradley, my lawyer. He knows a lot about property law and would be the one to tell Patricia she is way over the line. On the second ring, Tom picked up the phone. He probably didn't understand why I was calling him so early. He asked Cole, "What's going on?" I told him what took place. Patricia took down my dock, saying that the law allowed her to do so. Tom spoke up again after a long pause. "She what? What do you do when the law is on your side? The twist that comes next will surprise you. Watch out for now." In 20 minutes, Tom showed up at my cabin with his briefcase and looked ready to fight. He looked at the damage, wrote things down, and took pictures. After a while, he turned to me and said, "Patricia, what you did is not only wrong, it's illegal. She had no right to destroy private property in that way. The law said she had to give notice in writing and follow the right steps. The paper she showed me was not valid in a legal sense." It was clear to Tom that Patricia had gone too far. "She's looking at both civil and criminal charges," he stated. I was so happy to be free, but I still didn't get how she thought she could get away with it. But there's still more to this story. Stay tuned to find out how Patricia's actions hurt the whole neighborhood. As Tom and I talked about what had happened, I chose to find out more about Patricia's past of picking on her neighbors. My neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Wilson, had lived in the area longer than anyone else. It was scary what she told me when we talked. She told him, "That woman has been crazy. Patricia gave her a ticket for having too much grass. She tells me my lawn is too long when I've been taking care of it for years." Dorothy couldn't believe it. It wasn't only Dorothy. When people in the neighborhood heard what happened to my dock, they told their own stories. They were given a ticket because their mailbox was not the right shade of black. They got a ticket for putting up their Christmas lights 3 days early. People made threats against the Chin family because they planted flowers that weren't on the HOA's approved list. It wasn't only about me. Everyone was scared during Patricia's rule of terror. Watch how this fight brings people in the neighborhood together. As I put the puzzle together, I understood that my dock had become a sign of resistance against Patricia's rule. A lot of people liked it, and it kept them from paying attention to her events. Because Patricia couldn't stand the thought of losing power, she chose to go even further. Patricia walked over one day while I was talking to Mrs. Wilson in her yard. She looked like she was on a mission. Before she even got to us, she said, "There's too much noise over here. This is against the noise ordinances in our community." We were just talking quietly in a garden. It was hard for me not to laugh. It didn't go over well with Mrs. Wilson. "Patricia, we're having a normal conversation," she stated. "If this is too loud for you, maybe you should move to a monastery." Patricia kept going. She began to talk about new rules for waterfront homes and insisted that all buildings near the lake needed to be approved by the HOA. Tom finally spoke up after hearing quietly. With the cool voice of a lawyer, he told Patricia, "You might want to check your legal standing. What you did this morning could lead to serious charges." Was this the moment when the battle changed? Check out the video to see how this fight went. For the first time, Patricia looked scared. I wasn't done yet, though. As she thought about what Tom had said, I went to my workshop and made a beautiful wooden sign that said Walker Family Dock since 1987. I put it right where my dock used to be to make a strong statement. This was my family's land and history. But things changed when Mrs. Wilson said in a whisper, "She's been hanging out with some weirdos lately. I think she has bigger plans than just your dock." Patricia might be up to something even worse. Watch out for the shocking news. It was all over the news by afternoon that my dock was being torn down. I chose to use Patricia's attack as a chance to do something. I called a meeting of the community on the spot where my dock was destroyed. A disagreement in the neighborhood turned into a block party. Around the block, people brought chairs, food, and drinks. Over 30 families came to hear the whole story and tell their own scary Patricia stories. Want to know how the people in my neighborhood helped me? Watch to find out how this unplanned event turned into a turning point. Just as everyone was getting excited, a neighbor named Bob Henderson stood up. "Cole, I feel bad about your dock," he added. "But some of us are worried about making Patricia angrier. We just refinanced our house and can't afford any fines." People in the neighborhood were afraid that Patricia would get back at them, but they were ready to stand up for ourselves. Pat's time was up. We had fought for what was right together. Bob said, "Maybe we should try to work with her instead of, making this into a war." I could see that some people in the group were beginning to doubt. Patricia's attempts to scare people were working just as she had planned. My phone buzzed with a message that made my blood run cold before I could answer Bob's question. I was sent a link to a video on a local community forum that showed Patricia standing in front of the wreckage of the destroyed dock with a caption removing safety hazards from our community. In the video, she said that my dock was built with poor materials and children could drown in it. "This is exactly why we have HOA oversight," she told the camera. "Some people in the area think they can build whatever they want without worrying about the safety of their neighbors." The lies and propaganda were so stupid that they made my hands shake with anger. I almost put my phone down and called off the whole thing right then. People who didn't know the real story were already sharing the video and leaving positive comments. I could see how quickly Patricia's story could become the accepted truth. For a moment, I really thought about just paying her whatever fine she wanted and building my dock somewhere else in peace. But then I looked around at my neighbors, real people who had taken time out of their Saturday to stand up for what was right, and understood that giving up now would only make Patricia harass everyone else more. "You know what?" I said, taking out my phone and turning on live stream. For everyone to see that I was live, I held up the phone and said, "I think it's time people heard the truth about what's really happening in our community." Then I turned to talk to the camera and the people in the room. "Hello, everyone. My name is Cole Walker, and I want you to see what happens when you try to make your community better and the HOA president thinks you're a threat to her power." I moved the camera across the floating debris where my dock used to be, and then to the neighbors who had come together to support me despite Patricia's attempts to scare them. Patricia and Bruce showed up at the edge of my land like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, as if they were called there by a bad force. Patricia had her infamous clipboard with her, and her phone was out, likely recording proof of our heinous act of talking on private property. "This gathering is breaking our community noise ordinances," she said as she walked toward us, Bruce following behind like a nervous friend. "Everyone must leave right away or face fines for being a part of an illegal gathering." The irony was stunning. We were sitting quietly on private land, but for some reason, this was a violation that should have led to fines. But Bruce seemed to have chosen to go further than Patricia's usual threats. As people were putting away their chairs, He walked up to the Henderson family with a plastic folder and an ominous look on his face. He spoke out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Bob, I've been looking over your property records. That shed you built last year might not have proper setback clearances. I'd hate to have to order a professional survey, but if you keep doing things like this, the HOA board might have to take a closer look at everyone's compliance status." The threat was clear and calculated. If you support coal, we'll find expensive ways to make your life miserable. That's when everything changed. Mrs. Wilson got up from her folding chair and gave Bruce a look that could have melted steel. She had been watching the fight in silence. "Honey, I've lived in this neighborhood since before you were born, and I've seen a lot of bullies come and go. But I've never seen anyone as weak as someone who threatens families for having a picnic." She spoke to the crowd, and her voice had the authority of someone who had been a good citizen for decades. It was an instant and exciting change. If Patricia and Bruce want to make our neighborhood their own personal police state, that's their choice. But they're going to have to go through all of us to do it. The neighbors didn't pack up to leave. Instead, they started putting out more chairs and food. The kids who were playing quietly started to laugh and run around again. Just minutes before, Bob Henderson was worried about getting fined, but now he walked right up to Bruce and said, "You know what, go ahead and order that survey. I'll pay for it myself, just to prove there's nothing wrong with my shed." Patricia's face turned a lot of different shades of red as she realized how badly her attempts to scare Bruce had failed. "Fine," she finally yelled so loudly that everyone in the neighborhood could hear. "You want to play games? I'll show you who really has authority around here. This whole lake area is about to change, and there's nothing any of you can do to stop it." I chose to do some detective work the next morning. I had been worried all night about Patricia's threat to make big changes to the lake area, especially after Mrs. Wilson said something about strange meetings. Tom agreed to help me with what we joked about calling reconnaissance, but it was clear right away that this wasn't a joke. We followed Patricia's car as it left her house around 10 o'clock, staying far enough away so we wouldn't be seen but close enough to see where she was going. About 15 minutes away, she drove to a restaurant called Denny's. It's not the kind of place you'd expect to find real estate plots, but it's great for secret meetings. We saw Patricia meet up with a man in a fancy suit who was carrying a leather bag through the restaurant window. It didn't look like a casual breakfast meeting between friends. There were papers spread out on the table, and people were looking at what looked like maps or charts very seriously. Tom and I were able to get a table close enough to hear some of what they were saying without drawing attention to ourselves. I felt very cold after hearing what we did. It was a man from a company called Lakeside Development LLC, and they were talking about a deal to rent out all of our HOA's waterfront rights. The conversation made Patricia's real reason for attacking my dock and bothering other neighbors clear. Lakeside Development wanted to make what they called premium lake access, by getting rid of all the private docks and putting in a single waterfront facility that would be professionally handled. Homeowners would pay monthly fees to store their boats and get to the lake. The construction company would keep the money they made and pay Patricia $2,000 a month as a management fee. The plan was to make money off of our access to the lake, while giving Patricia more money and power over the town. At breakfast with coffee and pancakes, the lawyer told Patricia, "The private docks are the main problem. Once those are gone, we can start making money right away with a unified waterfront plan. Demolition of that designer's dock at the perfect time sends a clear message about who's in charge," the man said. Patricia sighed in pleasure, clearly enjoying her role as the enforcer in this scheme. "I've already started issuing violation notices to other waterfront property owners," she said with pride. "Give me another month, and I'll have them all ready to surrender their dock rights voluntarily." Tom and I looked at each other so hard that steel could have melted. Not only was Patricia going on a power trip, but a construction company was using her as a front to steal our lake access and use it to make money. The plot of the scheme was so big and crazy that it was shocking. They wanted to get rid of the decades-old ways of using the lake and replace them with a system run by corporations that would charge us for things we'd always done for free. Patricia was getting paid a lot to make it happen, which is why she suddenly started harassing people more. We stayed long enough to hear when their plan would happen. Patricia said she would get rid of all private docks within 2 months by harassing people, making up complaints, and if necessary, tearing them down. Lakeside Development would take care of all the legal paperwork and build the new building. Patricia would work with the community and get paid every month as a manager. Everyone was happy with the plan except the homeowners, who would give up their traditional lake rights and pay to use the amenities in their own area. When Patricia and her partner left the diner, Tom and I were shocked and silent as we thought about what we had just learned. Tom finally said, "This is fraud on more than one level. Patricia doesn't have the power to lease community waterfront rights, and she definitely can't tear down private property to make it happen. But by the time this gets to court, they may have already done enough with their plan that it will be hard to undo." I had a different idea in mind. Going to court would take months or years, and in the meantime, Patricia would keep scaring our neighbors into giving up. I needed an answer right away that was clear, legal, and enforceable. That's when the idea came to me. What if we had power over the lake? I asked. What will happen if lakeside development wants to make money off of lake access, but there is no lake to reach? Tom thought I was crazy, but I was already looking up information on my phone about where the water in Lake Millfield comes from. Millfield Dam keeps this whole lake full. It was built by the old mill company in 1965. If that business shut down, it was easy for Tom to understand. "Do you want to buy the dam?" he said with more and more excitement. "If you control the flow of water, you control everything that comes after." The simple plan was brilliant. It wouldn't matter if Patricia tore down every dock on the lake if there was water for people to dock in. And if I owned the dam, I would be the one to decide how much water was in it, not some faraway company. It was the biggest turnabout possible. I could get rid of the resource Patricia was trying to control instead of going to court to fight her plan, which could take years. I was already figuring out in my head how much it would cost to buy the water rights, and if I had enough money to beat a development company's price. Patricia's plan was about to run into a very big, firm obstacle in some way. I was driven by a mix of determination and desperation I'd never felt before that night as I dove deep into study about this lake's water source. What I found was even better than I had hoped, but it was also more important than I thought. The Millfield Mill Company built Millfield Dam in 1965 to provide water for their lumber processing business. The lake depended on it for all of its water needs. County records show that the Millfield Mill Company filed for bankruptcy not long ago, and all of their goods are now being sold at public auction. The running rights for the dam were set to be auctioned off this coming Saturday, which is only 5 days away. The timing seemed like fate, but my joy was tempered by a disturbing find in the auction paperwork. The bidder registration list shows that a company called Lakeside Development LLC had already sent in basic paperwork to be a part of the auction. When I found out that Patricia's criminal partners had apparently come up with the same plan I had, my heart sank. If Lakeside Development took over the dam, they would not only control how people got to the lake, they would also control the lake itself. They could change the water levels to get rid of anyone who was still against their plan to build on the shore. Even though it was almost midnight, I called Tom Bradley right away. "Tom, we have a problem," I told him when he woke up. "Lakeside Development is going to bid on the dam at the auction on Saturday. Patricia's plan will be impossible to stop if they get control of the water rights." Tom thought about this for a long time. "Do you think they'll spend a lot of money?" he asked. "For sure more than I have," I answered. "The least they could bid is $120,000, but I think they could go much higher if they really wanted it." Another bad surprise came in the form of an email that Mrs. Wilson had sent to me on Tuesday morning. Based on the style of writing, it looks like Bruce sent a message to a few neighbors warning them about the financial risks of backing my careless lawsuits against the HOA. The email said that anyone who gave money to my cause could be held personally responsible if my acts led to lawsuits or damage to property. Legally speaking, it was nonsense, but it worked on a psychological level. Several friends who had said they would help with money called to say they were sorry and would not be able to help. By Wednesday afternoon, I was getting a harsh reality check about my money. I was able to raise about $140,000 with the help of family and neighbors who were still willing to give. That could be enough to beat out other buyers, but it probably wouldn't be enough if Lakeside Development really wanted to buy the dam. Looking at my laptop screen all night on Wednesday, I tried to figure out how to connect what I had with what I might need. When I finally got it, the answer was clear and scary at the same time. I could go back on my cabin loan. The land had been in my family for 3 generations and was worth about $200,000 at least. I might be able to get enough money to compete with Lakeside Development if I use it as collateral for a loan. But there was a huge risk. If something went wrong with my plan, I might lose the family property that caused the fight in the first place. I felt like I was putting everything on the line in one hand of poker, but the stakes were my grandfather's property and my own financial security. I called my mortgage broker Thursday morning to talk about my refinancing choices. The talk was enlightening. "Cole, you're talking about borrowing against almost the entire value of the property," she explained. "If you can't make the payments, you'll lose the cabin. Are you sure you want to take that kind of risk?" I wasn't sure at all, but I was more sure that I couldn't let Patricia and her corporate partners steal our community's lake access. "Set up the paperwork," I told her. "I'll sign whatever documents you need." That afternoon, I got an unexpected visit from my college roommate, Dave Chun, who had driven up from the city after hearing about my situation through mutual friends. As soon as I opened the door, he said, "Cole, I need to talk to you about this damn thing. People say you want to get into a bidding war with developers by taking out a mortgage on your grandfather's cabin. That's crazy, dude. Everything could be lost." When it came to our friendship, Dave had always been the more realistic one. Seeing the worry in his eyes made me wonder if I was making the right choice. As we sat on the front porch of the house and looked out at the lake, I told Dave, "This isn't just about my dock anymore. Patricia wants to make our whole waterfront a place where businesses can make money. If I don't stop her, every family in this area will lose access to the lake and have to pay a monthly fee to use their own neighborhood amenities." Dave slowly shook his head. "But putting your home and your grandfather's inheritance at risk? There has to be another way to fight this," he said. I didn't want to accept it, but I knew he was right about the risks I was taking. There are times, though, when giving up feels worse than the thought of losing everything. "Dave, my grandfather built this cabin so that families could spend time together at the lake." I took out my phone and showed him the video Patricia had shared with her lies about safety risks and poor construction. If I let Patricia destroy that vision just to be safe, I'll have already lost what's most important to me. She's not going to leave my dock alone. She will keep scaring families until someone with more power tells her to stop. That person has to be me right now. I signed the paperwork to refinance my cabin on Friday afternoon. This put it at risk, but it gave me access to enough cash to bid competitively at the sale on Saturday. As I left the bank, I felt both strong and scared at the same time. I had just put my whole future at risk because I thought that controlling the water supply would give me the power to stop Patricia's plan. That I could lose everything my family had worked hard to build over 3 generations if I was wrong, if the law didn't work the way Tom thought it would, or if I couldn't pay for the upkeep on the dam. But as I drove home and saw the floating pieces of my dock that had been torn down, I knew I had made the only choice I could live with. The sale on Saturday would show if David could still beat Goliath in modern America. About 40 people were spread out on folding chairs that looked like they had been taken from a church basement in the courthouse auction room, which was busier than I thought it would be. Most of the people there looked like serious investors or people from development companies. They were wearing expensive suits and bringing thick folders of paperwork. Even though my work casual clothes made me feel a little out of place, I told myself that I had every right to be there. The auctioneer was a thin man with an unusually loud voice. He started the process by going over the rules for all the Millfield Mill Company items that were going to be sold. 7th on the list was the operating rights for the dam. The other items ranged from industrial tools to timber rights on thousands of acres. I tried to act casual while going over my bidding plan in my head, but my heart was beating fast. As we were going over the earlier items, a $300,000 timber business bought the rights to the trees. Different pieces of mill equipment were sold to people who buy scrap metal and antiques. When it was finally time to bid on the Millfield Dam water flow control rights, I was sure that everyone in the room could hear my heart beating fast. "The bidding will begin at $120,000, the auctioneer said. I waited for someone else to make the first offer because I didn't want to seem too excited. An auctioneer gave a guy in a gray suit near the front of the room a nod when he raised his paddle. There was a bid of $120,000 from buyer 14. I put up my paddle. $130,000 from bidder 22. The bidding kept going in $10,000 chunks, with gray suit and I trading raises while the rest of the room looked on without seeming interested. At $160,000, Gray suit thought about making his next offer but didn't. I could see him looking through his folder of notes and maybe figuring out if the water rights were worth more than the amount of money he was allowed to spend. I quickly put in a bid of $180,000 when he bid $170,000. After what seemed like an endless pause, Gray suit finally shook his head and put down his paddle. "Do I hear $190,000? Call out!" the auctioneer yelled, looking around the room for anyone else who wanted to bid. Keep quiet. Going once, going twice. The gavel hit the floor with a loud bang that shook me to my core. I had won $180,000. I was now able to run Millfield Dam and had full control over how much water went into Lake Millfield. The effect on the economy was huge. I had pretty much put all of my future savings on this one buy. But the effects on strategy were even more important. Patricia could tear down every dock on the lake, bother every property in our neighborhood, and make any deal with lakeside development she pleased. It wouldn't matter if the lake didn't have any water in it. The papers took an extra hour to finish, but by noon, I was leaving the courthouse with proof that I was in charge of our whole community's water supply. As I drove home, I was filled with excitement because I knew Patricia's last threat to destroy the house was set for Monday morning. She didn't know that I had just officially become the stronger person. I worked out plans with Earl, the current operator of the dam, who had been in charge of it for the mill company for more than 20 years and was stern but friendly. During our phone call, he said, "Most of the time, the dam pretty much runs itself. Just give me a call when you want to change the flow rate, and I'll make the changes you need." When I asked him how long it would take for the water level to change, his answer was perfect for what I needed. The lake level can change a lot in just a few hours, depending on how much you want to sink it. Sunday went by without a hitch. There was no sign of Patricia or any work being done to get ready for her upcoming demolition. I worked all day on my temporary floating dock, which was coming together nicely with recycled materials and floating plastic barrels. Several neighbors came by to help with the building and asked me what I was going to do about Patricia's new threats. I avoided answering their questions by giving them vague reassurances that everything would be okay. I didn't want to share my secret until the right time. That night, I called Earl to talk about how to make my plans work. The lake level needs to drop by about 40% tomorrow morning, I told him. That can't happen that fast. Earl's laugh made it sound like he'd gotten requests from strangers during his work. That's fine. Just call me when you're ready to start, and I'll slowly cut back on the output. Depending on the weather, it should take about 2 to 3 hours to see the whole thing. It seemed like everything was going to plan. Patricia believed she was about to deal the last blow to the community's defiance. She was about to find out that every pond has bigger fish. When Monday morning came, the sky was clear as glass, and it felt like divine justice was in the air. I woke up early and sat with a cup of coffee at my front window, waiting for Patricia's teardown crew to show up at 8 o'clock. I could hear the sound of big machines coming down our street. After starting out with chainsaws, Patricia now had 2 bulldozers and what looked like a small crane. She clearly planned to say something that would scare off anyone in our community who was still fighting back. She didn't know that I was about to say something much bigger that would put an end to her rule of terror for good. Patricia showed up at my house with what looked like a small group of reporters and heavy machines, like a conquering general. She had invited the local newspaper and even a freelance videographer, as if she wanted to record her final win over the community's opposition. The bulldozers rolled into place while Patricia stood nearby with her clipboard and led the operation as if she were in charge of a military attack. Bruce Tate nervously hung back behind her, checking his watch and occasionally casting an eye toward the growing group of neighbors who had come to see this latest turn in our HOA drama. It looked like everyone in the neighborhood came out to see the show. Families stood on their porches and in their yards, and many had their phones out to record what would either be Patricia's big win or a total disaster. Mrs. Wilson brought a folding chair and a thermos of coffee, and she sat down like she was going to a play outside. The Morrison family was carefully placed on their deck to get the best view, while the Henderson family was live-streaming the whole thing from their front yard. It looked like Patricia liked the attention because she was making big gestures and talking loudly enough for everyone to hear why the demolition was necessary. Patricia told her audience that she was going to take down the last of the illegal buildings in her waterfront area today. This will take care of the safety and beauty of our community lake access for all residents. She was wearing what looked like her best outfit, which was an old blazer that she was wearing to look official and in charge. The bulldozer driver looked bored, and he or she was probably wondering why such an easy job of demolition needed so much showmanship. But Patricia loved every second of what she thought would be her total victory over my refusal to follow her orders. To make the scene more dramatic, I walked slowly and carefully down to the water's edge while carrying a manila envelope. Patricia saw me coming and smiled, probably thinking I was about to give up or beg for forgiveness. "Patricia!" I yelled so loudly that everyone could hear me. "You might want to look at this before you tear down anything else." I gave her the envelope with the same ceremonial weight she used to hand out her fake violation notes. "What is this?" "Do what I say," she ordered, but her tone of confidence was growing shaky. Patricia took the proof of ownership for Millfield Dam water rights out of the envelope when she opened it. She looked at the paper for a moment, clearly confused. She was probably trying to make sense of the legal words she didn't understand. "What is this about?" she asked, but her voice didn't sound as strong as it used to. "That's proof that I own the dam that controls all the water in this lake," I said in a cool voice. "As of Saturday, I own the complete water flow rights to Lake Millfield. That means I can shut off the water to the whole lake whenever I want." As people thought about what I had said, silence fell over the room. Patricia's face showed a range of emotions, from confusion to denial to anger to a state that looked like panic. She choked out, "You can't do that. That's not allowed. A lake can't be turned off." I grabbed my phone and called Earl. I put the call on speaker so that everyone could hear. "Hi Earl, this is Cole Walker." Earl's happy voice could be clearly heard over the phone. "I need you to cut the outflow by 50% right now." "That's right, Cole. The process of lowering has begun. Within 20 minutes, you should be able to see the water level drop." The demolition crew that worked for Patricia looked confused as their boss started walking and calling people more and more desperately. A crowd of people in the neighborhood were mesmerized by this real-time show of power that none of them saw coming. The water level dropped so much in 30 minutes that several feet of lake bottom were visible along the shore. The community's boat docks stopped working because boats got stuck in the mud and on rocks that were sticking out. The most important thing was that Patricia and her partner's expensive boats were now sitting high and dry, looking silly and impossible to get to. "This is crazy," Patricia screamed, and she seemed to forget about the people watching on TV as her fear took over all of her confidence. "You can't drain a lake just because you don't like your dock." I kept my cool and spoke clearly so that everyone could understand what I said. "Well, I guess I can. I legally own the water rights, which means I can change the amount of the water, just like you say you own my dock." The comparison was perfect. Patricia said she had the power to destroy my property, and now I was using real power to show her what would happen if she didn't stop. The killing blow came when Patricia tried to call someone at Lakeside Development for help. It was clear from her phone that the man was angry because he knew their whole plan had just failed. "How could you not know about the rights to the water?" he was yelling. "Our whole plan was to control who could get into the lake. Letting out waterfront land doesn't make sense if the lake is dry." It was being shown live to everyone in the neighborhood and taped on multiple phones so that no one would forget Patricia's deal. Patricia finally said, "Please," and her voice broke with pleading. "Just turn the water back on. Please don't damage the lake. I'll quit the HOA and cancel all the violation warnings." It took less than 2 hours for him to go from being a haughty ruler to a pleading beggar. People in my neighborhood were happy for the first time in months when I looked around. "Earl," I begged on my phone, "please get the water flowing normally again." As Patricia slouched against one of her useless bulldozers in defeat, I understood that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to get more power than them and show that you're ready to use it. After 6 months, our community was back to living together peacefully like it was before Patricia's rule of terror. After Patricia and Bruce quit, a new HOA board was chosen. This board focused on making the community better instead of power trips and fake violation notices. With the money I still had saved, I built a new community dock that was bigger and nicer than the old one. It had a sign that said, "Residence Dock, no HOA approval required." The dock turned out to be exactly what I had hoped for, a place where neighbors could get together, kids could fish safely, and everyone could watch the sun go down over Lake Millfield without thinking about getting fined or being bothered. Everyone in the area brought food and drinks to Mrs. Wilson's celebration barbecue at the new dock. She raised her lemonade glass to Cole Walker as we watched the sun go down over the lake. Someone taught us that the best way to deal with a bully is to make them stop something they need more than something you want. The cheers and laughter made me feel better than any formal win could have. Patricia knew that community energy and creative problem-solving will always win over small-scale oppression and fake authority. As the evening came to a close and people went home, I stayed on the dock I had built for everyone to enjoy by myself. It was calm as the water hit the pilings, and the underwater lights gave the water a magical glow. My grandfather would have been proud of what this place had become. Not just a pretty building, but also a sign of what people can do when they work together instead of letting people who think they are in charge split them up. I'm not a strong person, but if you take away my memories, I'll take away your whole world. And sometimes bullies need to know the difference between having power and being in charge.